Hey guys, it's Kara Jane with Ice Cream for Buttercream, and today I want to talk about how to cover a cake board. So I want to talk about how you can pretty much use anything to cover your cake boards, but there are a few tips and tricks that I want you to know about doing that. And first I want to show you a couple of examples on different things that you can use to cover your cake boards. This cake board is covered with some scrapbook paper, and I've just added a ribbon around the edge of the cake base. And this one is the same. I've just added some black and white polka dot scrapbook paper. And the next one is just some fancy foil that I've used to cover it. And Wilton has fancy foil, and you can get it in silver and white and I believe gold and I think black. I prefer the white just because it's so neutral and it's not quite as flashy as the gold and silver. And then I've just added a ribbon to go around the edge of the board. And for this one, I have just stacked two cake bases on top of each other just to kind of give it a little bit of a variation, so it's just not your normal kind of cake board or cake base. All right, so let's go through some of the supplies that you'll need to cover cake boards. And I'm using the term cake board, but really it's the cake base. It's the very bottom of the cake. And so if I say cake board, I mean cake base. They're sort of interchangeable here. But you're going to need an actual cake base, obviously. And you can stack a couple of cake boards together, like the cardboard cake board rounds. You can glue several of them together to make a thicker cake base. You only want to do that if your cake's not going to be too heavy that's going to be sitting on top of it. If the cake is going to be heavier, you need a more supportive cake base. You want to use something like foam core board, and I like to use the 1/2 inch thick foam core board. It's really very sturdy. Or you can use the MDF, which is just a wood composite board, if you really need a super sturdy cake base. Okay, and some examples of some things that you can cover your cake base with. You can use wrapping paper, and I like to buy the big, huge rolls of white wrapping paper, and then I'll show you how to actually cover that and make it food safe. You can also use scrapbook paper. You can use, like I talked about earlier, the fancy foil. You can use glitter paper. You could even use paper bags. There's endless supply of stuff that you could use to cover your cake boards. The main thing is that you've got to make it to where it's food safe. So part of the cake may end up touching that cake base or cake board. So you don't want, the glitter from your paper or whatever you've decided to use to cover it. You really don't want your cake touching that unless it's food safe. And I am about to show you what I do to make it food safe. So essentially you're going to cover your cake base with clear contact paper. And you can get clear contact paper from virtually any dollar store generally, and you can also get it from Walmart, and then you can order it from Amazon. And you want to see if you can get the long rolls of it, because if you have a wide or a very large cake base, you don't want to have to put it in sections where you're having to piece it together. So if you go to your dollar store and they have just the short rolls of clear contact paper, you can do that if you've got a smaller cake base, but you may want to order some longer rolls on Amazon, or you can piece them together. It's totally up to you. But I'm about to show you how I actually like to put that together. But first, let's talk about a couple more supplies you're going to need, and that's scissors. You would need an X-Acto knife, and that's kind of optional, and I'll show you in a minute what I like to use that for. I like to use a smoother, and I just use my buttercream smoother or something that you use to smooth your buttercream on your cake. You can even use a credit card. You just need something that's going to smooth down the contact paper. You can also use ribbon and glue. You can attach a ribbon around the edge of it. You don't have to do that, but it sort of gives it a nice final touch to it. And then you're going to need clear packing tape, which is just sort of box tape, hot glue. You're going to need cardboard cake rounds, and this is not to use as your base. We're going to attach this to the bottom of our base. So you're going to need a smaller cardboard cake round, generally about the size of the cake that is going to be actually sitting on top of your cake base. And I'll explain a little bit more about that later. And then you're going to need some felt feet, and these are just little round felt I just call them felt feet. I really don't know what else they're called, but if you search on Amazon felt feet, they'll pop up. But they're just little round felt things, and they have a little sticky back, and we're going to stick those underneath our cake base, and I'll show you in a minute what that's used for. Okay, so right now I'm just showing you what I like to use, which is a 1/2-inch foam core cake board, and they're really sturdy, and I find that I really enjoy working with these. I don't have to worry about them buckling under the weight of a cake. Okay, and I just bought a large roll of white wrapping paper at my local craft store, and that's generally what I use. But of course, you can use some of the other options that I mentioned earlier. And this is the contact paper that I like to use. I just get mine from the dollar store. So if your dollar store has the longer, wider kind of contact paper rolls, then you can go ahead and do that. Again, you might have to purchase a longer roll on Amazon if your dollar store has rolls that are too short for your large cake board. And now I'm just setting my cake base on top of my wrapping paper, which is what I'm gonna wrap over my cake base. And I'm just gonna cut it to size, and then I sort of cut around the corners and round them off a bit. And now I'm going to use my clear tape, the box tape that I mentioned earlier. And I'm going to take one side of the wrapping paper and pull it and tape it to the middle of my cake board. And you want to pull it pretty tight. And then I'm going to tape the other side, pull the wrapping paper from the other side and pull it really tight and tape that down. This way you get a really tight fit. And now I'm just going to sort of pleat it and fold it on itself as I go around the cake base. And I'm just going to add tape here and there. We're just going to keep going around. You may have to fiddle with it once you get close to the other side where you've taped the other side down. And it doesn't have to be perfect. This is going to be the underside, and I'll show you what we're going to do in a minute to kind of hide some of this. You may have to trim it a little bit here and there if you want, but just sort of fold it on itself and then smash it down and add the tape to it. And once I've finished taping everything down, I like to pick it up and roll it on its side like this, and that sort of smashes down anything that is sort of sticking up or a little bit puffy on the edges. All right, now it's covered, and so now we're going to add the clear contact paper to it to make it food safe. So I'm just going to roll out a bit of my contact paper and put it underneath my cake base. I'm going to cut it down to size. And it needs to be bigger than your base because we're going to fold it over the base like we did the wrapping paper. Okay, so I'm just peeling up a small little section from the contact paper, and I'm just going to lay it over one small corner of my cake base and kind of push it down a little bit. Now the backing is underneath it, and I'm lifting it up, and I'm going to grab the backing and pull it just a little bit. And I'm using my smoother on the top to smooth it as I go. And I keep pulling. You can see I keep pulling from underneath it. I'm pulling the backing, and I'm using my smoother on top to smooth out any bubbles as I slowly add the contact paper. I just keep pulling the backing and smoothing as I go, and go all the way until all the backing is off, until it's completely smooth on the top of your cake base. And then I'm just going to grab it and flip it over. And so the contact paper is sticky, so we're just going to fold it over on top of the wrapping paper that we've already wrapped our cake board with. And we're just going to fold it and pleat it just like we did the wrapping paper. Now the contact paper is sticky, so it is sticking a little bit, but it's not sticky enough. And so I don't want it to come up from underneath the cake base. And so I'm just going to add some more tape around any of the parts that are sticking up or that look like they might peel up a bit. So I'm just adding some of that box tape or the clear packing tape. And I also want to note here that some people, when they use this contact paper method, they actually cut it to the same width as the cake base, and they'll sort of cut it around. They won't wrap it over. I have done that, and I find that it does not work as well as I would want it to. They just use an X-Acto knife to go around the very edge. But I don't really like that method because if you don't fold it over, it doesn't sort of seal in. So if you get any moisture around the edge, or that could cause the contact paper to lift up on the edge. It just allows moisture to get under where you don't want it to get to, if that makes any sense. So I really like the fact that we're folding it over just like what we did with the wrapping paper, and we're not just cutting it around the edge. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to glue on a regular cardboard cake round. And I'm going to do that to the back. It does two things. It makes it a little bit prettier, and it is going to allow the cake base to be lifted up off of the table just a little bit. We're also going to add the felt feet to help with that, and I'll show that in a minute. But right now we're going to use hot glue to just attach a cardboard cake round onto the back of it, and I don't use it the same size as the cake base. I want it a little bit smaller, and it doesn't really matter how large it is. You just want it slightly smaller than your actual cake base that you're using. And so I'm using an ancient hot glue gun right here. I could not find my new hot glue gun, but it doesn't matter, it worked. And then just push on the cardboard cake round and make sure it's really good and secure. And see, that looks much nicer than all of that other stuff that you could see. Okay, now comes the fun part, and we're going to be adding on the felt feet. And I'm just showing you that if you have a center dowel, if you have a really tall cake and you're going to be adding a center dowel throughout the entire thing to kind of keep it really sturdy on the cake base, you're going to not want to put one of these felt feet in the middle of that cake board. So leave this spot empty. If you don't have a center dowel that you're going to be hammering through your entire cake, then you can put a felt foot, basically. You can put one in the middle. It's not going to do any harm. So I'm just going to start sticking these down. They have a little sticky on one side, and you just peel it off and you just go ahead and stick it down. And it doesn't matter how many you do. I usually like to do about 4 or maybe 6. It just depends. And the reason I like to add these is that this is going to add a little bit of height to your cake board. So when you go to pick up the cake board off of the table, instead of trying to get your fingers underneath it, now your fingers go right underneath the cake base. It can easily pick it up. And so not only does it make it kind of a prettier cake base, really, not that anybody's going to be looking underneath it, but it makes it so easy to move around. So instead of just trying to dig your fingers underneath that base to get a good grip on it to move the cake, it's lifted up from the table just enough to where you can get an easy grip on it. And now what you can do is you can add ribbon around the edge of your cake base if you want. You can do this after you've already added the cake to it, or you can do it before. I generally like to do it before and just use regular glue, or you can even use some super glue. I do find that if you use super glue to do it, sometimes that sort of kind of not soaks through your ribbon, but you can kind of see it through the ribbon. So if you I find that regular glue works better. Some people use double-sided tape, and I have found that that doesn't work very well for me. And another thing I like to do, and I learned this in a Craftsy class that I took, I also mentioned this in my How to Stack Cakes video, but I wanted to add it here as well. And this is, I'm cutting off a circle that is in the middle of my cake base, and I'm not digging in and cutting out a circle from the cake base. I'm just cutting a circle out of the wrapping paper and clear contact paper. So once I cut the circle, I'm going to add a little bit of tape around what I just cut out, just to kind of tape down the edges. But I want that bottom tier that I'm going to add to that cake base, I want that stuck to the cake base itself and not just the wrapping that I had on the cake base. And so when I cut out that little circle, that leaves a little circle of the actual cake base exposed. And so that is what I'm going to add my hot glue to, or my melted candy melts to, and then I will put that bottom tier on top of that, so that the bottom tier is stuck to the actual base and not just the wrapping that is on the base. And so there's no chance of it kind of scooting around on me, or maybe the wrapping that you put on the base might come loose or something like that, which is most likely not going to happen. But it just gives me a little bit of added stability, and it sort of just gives me a little bit more confidence in it. So this is optional, but if you want to try it out, I suggest go ahead and do that. It doesn't take much time to do that. All right, that's it. Thanks for watching, and I hope that this was helpful for you and will allow you to have a much wider option when you're trying to figure out what you're going to cover your cake boards with. And I love this option because you can pretty much use whatever you want to, and adding the clear contact paper onto it really makes it food safe and just sort of opens up so many different options for you. So if you have any questions, just leave me a comment and I will be happy to answer it for you, and I will see you next time.